that the report has been divided into uh, two major sections. The first section is uh, discussing the findings panel discussion wise. So the report starts with a quick summary on the panel discussion outputs. Then it leads into the key emerging challenges and opportunities that were discussed and that came out in the discussion, and what could be the possible actions and recommendations to address those challenges or to exploit those opportunities. So this was done for each of the panel discussion, and then there was a synthesis done. Uh, sure. And the recurrent themes out of the panel discussions were clubbed into a section called key themes. The idea of having key themes was that it could act as an enabler or a starting block for the policy workstream and policymakers to take note of and identify policy needs and further build on the policy workstream. It will also be a good base document for the industry workstream to take note and do some feasibility studies further to establish the commerciality and commercial viableness of those key theme and key decision pointers. So moving on, so the first theme that came out clearly, and Mr. Sukumar also mentioned about that there's a need for collaboration. And this is not required just with the supply chain. It needs to go beyond the localized supply chain. So we need to have collaboration and conversation across the entire value chain of shipping. Uh, it could be either in project-specific domain, or it could be a wider industry association or platform. Some of the specific examples from the panel discussion to mention here. So we have the coastal shipping green corridor is a good example. It could stimulate interaction between specific ports that can supply bunker and the ship owners to ensure regular supply and demand coordination. This would also help to set as a data sharing platform, which could help in achieving JIT arrivals at the port. And this will also incentivize ports to take fair responsibility of their role in a vessel CII rating achievement. The other good example that came out in the discussion was to provide a level playing field for the shore power suppliers. So obviously there's a need for interaction between the national and state governments because of the tariff disparity or the tax disparity. They also need, the ports and the ship owner needs to harmonize on the shore power requirements from a technical perspective and operational perspective. Uh, there's also a possibility of collaboration at landowners' side. So landowners can collaborate with the terminal operator to optimize on the use of land, either to generate solar power or as a carbon sink through the cross-funded reforestation programs. So these are some of the examples. We have the details mentioned in the report. Going on to the next theme, which came out as the need to establish a clear baseline with regards to the fuel of choice, the availability and timelines, and what could be the working amongst the, what will be the strategic priorities and the dynamics between them. So the specific examples from this session include that we need to have an aggregating fuel demand. So instead of simply dictating the fuel, which most likely would be decided by the market force in the long term, some work can be done to estimate the quantity, location, timelines, uh, and such expectations for the alternate fuels in discussion. This will help to demystify the problems from the perspective of fuel supplier or consumer. A clear aggregate demand would de-risk the investment into the infrastructure supply for that fuel, which can be developed suitably for the fuel being in discussion. Uh, the other good discussion pointer was around pooling the existing capabilities, resources, and infrastructure. So there's a reluctance to invest in R&D and skill development programs in general. Uh, but through this pooling of the existing capabilities, resources, infrastructure, that can be addressed. So we do have existing infrastructures and capabilities that can be repurposed to act as centers for green technology. And that would definitely help reduce the capex or initial investment required in those fields, and would be a quick path to establish the baseline and aggregate demand. Moving on, the third key theme that emerged from the discussion was the need to uh, have access to de-risked finance. So obviously, having finance is important because the ship technology, the port infrastructure, the fuel production, there's clear cost gap between the current technology and the expected alternate fuels, especially in the short and the medium term. So that can be addressed through the new streams of finance. So establishment of carbon market from savings from shipping can also be sold to other sectors. That could be a source of revenue and financing. In similar ways, tourism could be, there's opportunities for tourism or to repurpose idle assets, uh, which can be another source of revenue. There was also discussion around carbon levy or tax or other means. However, it was noted that these measures would need global uptake rather than country-specific measures for a fair competition. The other key discussion pointer was that to make the finance easily accessible to public, it needs to be de-risked through public-private partnership. So that there was mention and reference to other industries where uh, through partial credit guarantees or through concessional finance, and in coordination with the bank, the multilateral banks, or the governments, such financial instruments have been put in place, which were able to address the risk in the energy transition for that particular sector, and the same could be applied for the maritime sector as well. The other thing which came out clearly was the requirement for direct funding through dedicated green maritime fund or green shipping fund. And such funds could be pooled from a sovereign funds, pension funds, or also from industry-led R&D kind of funds. And examples were referred to Japan model and to the EU-funded development projects. The fourth theme that came out clearly was the need to accelerate green technology capability. Uh, Obviously, to access the requisite green technology and skill set is important to ensure that India is able to achieve its target for decarbonization. There's a need to collaborate with the countries, with the organizations which are ahead in the decarbonization curve. Uh, so that came out clearly, and we do believe that, it needs a concerted effort. So few examples that came out where this could be required was the green ship design capacity and capability. Uh, India is poised to become a hub for the ship design, and with the capability of green ship design, uh, India could very well be in position to export those services. The same goes with manufacturing capability. So it was it clearly came out that the Indian manufacturers do have the technology, but with the support from the developed economies and the proper knowledge transfer, India can build, can be a hub for the retrofits and the new build components for the global market. Uh, so moving on, I'll quickly dive into individual discussion sessions, and will point out the solutions that came out from the discussion and what could be the possible pathways and recommendations. Okay, so it's not in order. So I'll be starting with the green finance since that's a point of discussion. Uh, so, uh, so the clear solution was that we need to have access to affordable banking. The key challenge that came out, which were kind of impeding this, was the maritime financing is a high risk profile financing because of the cyclical nature of shipping, high upfront cost, the fragmented nature of the ownership and the future fuel uncertainty, also including the credit ratings of the country and the organization. So three possible actions that came out in the discussion were that we need to have partial credit guarantees or concessional loans, which could be established through a public-private partnership between commercial banks and the government or the the multilateral development banks. This has been done for other sectors like automotive and aviation and could be a good model to use for maritime. Uh, the other one was the investment decision should be made over a longer period of time, and the business model needs to be adjusted such that it's not front loaded. So uh, the feasibility is not calculated just basis the initial outlay of fund, but it considers the total life cycle cost of the asset. Uh, that came out clearly in the discussion. The other was that obviously the domestic banks would need to be incentivized so that they are ready to finance these risky investments. And those incentives could be in the terms of tax reliefs. It could be in direct means such as providing flexibility on the CRR, which is the cash reserve ratio that the bank needs to maintain. The other solution which came out was the need to monetize the existing assets and productions. Uh, so the carbon credit is currently not effectively used by most of the organization, and most of the credits is lost due to inefficient accounting. Uh, Also, the use of asset recycling as an additional source of finance revenue is not very prevalent. So the possible actions and recommendations that came out to address those challenges were, we definitely need to improve the awareness of carbon credit framework within the maritime organizations in India. Uh, have, we can integrate those requirements in the corporate reporting requirements so that it becomes a mandate and the organizations are forced to follow that. Uh, in terms of carbon market, the government is all set to launch a domestic carbon market. And this domestic carbon market will enable the domestic companies to trade carbon credits efficiently and help push through energy transition goals. The other solution that came out was to set up new sources of finance. Uh, so new sources of finance will be required to address the demand and fund the commercial feasibility gap. So dedicated green shipping fund, which could be formed by pooling from the sovereign funds and pension funds, came out as a solution. Uh, so this would ensure that the strategic investment in technologies, which are still not commercially viable and have a variably have a gap from economic feasibility to commercial feasibility, and this fund could help bridge that gap. Uh, and requirement, the third one was to set up, international collaboration and sharing of learning practices, because without the international cooperation, it'll be difficult to have the skill sets uh, to kind of deliver on the decarbonization targets. I'm wary of the time. Can I continue, sir? Or sure, sure. Again, so not in order. So next session we'll be talking about was it'll be green fuel for maritime in India. Again, LNG came out as a good solution for the 2030 target, considering its high TRL, and we already have the infrastructures in place, and it is being adopted already with good success. So the challenge from India's perspective was we still don't have the adequate bunkering infrastructure. And the reason was it's a high capital intensive investment. And There's a lack of supply-demand understanding with the suppliers and the terminals. The possible action is to have a proper demand aggregation. Uh, Government should conduct a holistic demand-supply assessment and baseline the requirement of alternate fuels, uh, the time and the ports and location, what could be the possible demography and distribution of that. That will give some confidence to these players to decide and then plan their growth and the alternate fuel which they want to grow ahead with. Obviously, to fund the gap, in sense the additional capex required, the upfront capex, we propose and we suggest that the government can support those through the dedicated fund that would be set up, and it could be funded through the VGF or the PPP model. The other key issue with LNG that came out was the issue around methane slip. Uh, the possible actions and recommendations for that is to reduce the methane slip through methane abatement technologies. There has been quite a lot of advancement on that, and with government intervention, we can have those technology transfers from the organization and countries who have already advanced on that. There's also a need to establish the well-to-tank carbon footprint of the sourced LNG. And there was a reference to the quality of LNG sourced from USA versus Qatar, Qatar being much cleaner. So we need to have a proper assessment to conduct a well-to-tank carbon footprint of the LNG source, and we can use that to show the kind of carbon emission that is being reduced by having these in place. The other solution that came out clearly was the use of biofuels. So the biofuels, again, a small amount of blending can provide good